In the heart of West Africa, where ancient traditions meet the harsh realities of modern governance, lies Burkina Faso, a nation struggling to define its destiny amid political upheaval and social transformation. This is the story of Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the world's youngest head of state, who seized power through a military coup in 2022 at the age of 34. But more than a tale of political ambition, this is a deeply human story about the unexpected ways personal responsibility intersects with public duty, and how a single moment of truth can transform not just a man, but an entire nation's understanding of leadership. When a young woman appeared at the presidential palace gates one morning with a baby she claimed belonged to the captain, she set in motion a chain of events that would challenge everything Traoré thought he knew about power, legacy, and what it truly means to serve one's people. This is their story, a narrative that unfolds in the corridors of Kosum Palace in Ouagadougou, reaches into the villages of northern Burkina Faso, and ultimately touches the heart of what makes a leader worthy of his people's trust. The crimson sun cast elongated shadows across the polished marble floors of Kosum Palace as Captain Ibrahim Traoré stood motionless at his office window. At 37, he carried himself with the disciplined bearing of a career soldier, his tall, lean frame silhouetted against the early light that painted Ouagadougou in golden hues. The red beret that had become his trademark sat perfectly positioned atop his head, a symbol of the revolutionary change he had brought to Burkina Faso through his 2022 coup. The weight of leadership had carved premature lines into his youthful face, evidence of sleepless nights spent wrestling with decisions that affected millions of lives. As the world's youngest head of state, every choice he made reverberated far beyond the palace walls, from the dusty villages of the Sahel to the conference rooms of international diplomats who watched his every move with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Captain, your morning security briefing is prepared," announced Lieutenant Sawadogo, entering after delivering the customary crisp knock that announced official business. The young officer's voice carried an undertone that immediately caught Traoré's attention, something beyond the routine morning reports of jihadist movements near the northern borders and diplomatic tensions with neighboring countries. Traoré turned from the window, his dark eyes sharp with the alertness that had served him well through years of military service and political maneuvering. "What is it, Lieutenant? Your demeanor suggests something beyond our usual security concerns." Sawadogo straightened, clearly uncomfortable with the information he was about to relay. "Sir, there is an unusual situation developing at the main security gate. A woman has arrived with an infant, demanding to speak with you personally. She claims the child is yours, Captain." The words seemed to hang in the air like smoke from a distant fire, filling the spacious office with an electric tension. Traoré's expression remained impassive, though those who knew him well might have noticed the almost imperceptible tightening around his eyes, the slight clench of his jaw that betrayed inner turmoil. "How many personnel have been exposed to this claim?" Traoré asked, his voice maintaining its characteristic measured tone even as his mind began racing through implications, possibilities, and half-remembered fragments of a different life. "Only the gate security team and myself, sir. We've maintained strict containment protocols, but the woman is becoming increasingly insistent. She states she will not leave until you acknowledge the child." Traoré walked slowly to his imposing mahogany desk, his fingers briefly drumming against its polished surface, a rare display of nervous energy from a man known for his unshakable composure. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to consider the possibility that his carefully ordered world was about to be fundamentally altered by the arrival of one woman and her claim. 20 minutes later, Traoré entered the modest reception room to find a young woman seated with remarkable poise despite the extraordinary circumstances. She held a baby of perhaps 10 months in her arms, the child's curious eyes taking in the unfamiliar surroundings with the fearless interest of the very young. The woman rose immediately upon his entrance. Her bright yellow dress, traditional but clearly well-made, stood out against the room's neutral colors. Her head was wrapped in a carefully arranged green headscarf that framed a face of quiet determination. Most striking were her eyes, dark, intelligent, and completely without the deference he had grown too accustomed to seeing in others. They met his gaze directly, neither challenging nor pleading, but simply present with an honesty that was somehow more unsettling than either extreme might have been. "Captain Traoré," she said, her voice carrying a steadiness that surprised him. There was no tremor of nervousness, no hint of opportunism he might have expected from someone making such a dramatic claim. "I understand you wish to speak with me about a matter of personal importance," he replied, maintaining a careful distance while studying both mother and child with the analytical mind that had served him well in military intelligence. "This is your son," she stated with simple directness, adjusting the child so that Traoré could see the boy's face clearly. "His name is Ismael." The baby regarded Traoré with unguarded curiosity before turning to nestle against his mother's shoulder with the unconscious trust of a child secure in his primary attachment. Something in that simple gesture, the boy's complete confidence in his mother's protection, struck Traoré unexpectedly. "And you are?" he asked, revealing nothing in his tone, while his trained eye catalogued details, the woman's composure, the child's apparent health and contentment, the quality of their clothing that suggested modest means but careful attention. "Fatimata Wedderogo," she replied. "We met in Kaya 2 years ago when you were stationed there before everything changed in your life and in our country's life." Kaya. The name triggered a cascade of memories that Traoré had not accessed in months. A military outpost in Burkina Faso's troubled north, long days fighting insurgents, precious evenings of respite in the small town where local hospitality had provided brief refuge from the harsh realities of counterterrorism operations. He remembered a young woman who worked at the regional hospital, conversations under star-filled skies about their country's future, moments of human connection in the midst of a brutal conflict. That was indeed a different time, Traoré acknowledged carefully, a different life for all of us in this country. "Yet here we are," Fatimata replied with a slight smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "And here is your son, very much a part of your current life whether you acknowledge it or not." The directness of her statement, delivered without malice but with unmistakable firmness, reminded him of qualities he had admired in their brief time together, an integrity that refused to bend to convenience or politeness when truth was at stake. "What exactly do you want from me?" His question was more abrupt than he had intended, revealing perhaps some of the pressure he felt. "Recognition, support, for you to know your child and for him to know his father. I didn't come seeking money or political position or social elevation. I came because Ismael deserves to know where he comes from, and because you should know your son." "You understand the complications this presents," Traoré said, his tone shifting slightly toward the diplomatic register he used in challenging negotiations. "I understand that you're now the president of Burkina Faso. I understand that appearances matter in your position, but I also understand that truth matters more, and that the kind of leader you claim to be would not run from personal responsibility any more than he would run from national responsibility. A silence settled between them, broken only by Ismael's soft babbling as he played with a fold in his mother's dress. Traoré found himself studying the child's features with new attention, the shape of his eyes, the set of his jaw, subtle resemblances that might or might not be meaningful. The door opened slightly, and Lieutenant Sawadogo appeared. "Captain, forgive the interruption, but the cabinet ministers are arriving for your scheduled Security Council meeting." Traoré nodded, his mind already shifting to the immediate practical necessities. "Arrange secure and comfortable accommodations," he instructed, gesturing toward Fatimata and Ismael. "Private quarters with appropriate security protocols. I'll continue this discussion when time permits." As he moved toward the door, Fatimata spoke again, her voice carrying a note that made him pause. "The people call you the people's captain. They believe in your honesty, your integrity, your commitment to truth over convenience. Will you show that same integrity in your personal life as you demand in your public service?" Traoré paused at the threshold without turning back, feeling the weight of her challenge. "We'll speak tomorrow," he said simply, and left. That evening, despite his administration's efforts at complete discretion, whispers began to filter through the palace staff. By nightfall, rumors had taken flight across Ouagadougou with the speed that only truly significant news can achieve. Radio stations picked up fragments, social media exploded with speculation, and by midnight, the story had reached every corner of the capital. A woman had entered the presidential palace with a baby she claimed belonged to Captain Traoré. The nation that had embraced their young revolutionary leader now collectively held its breath, wondering what this development would mean for the man they had come to see as Burkina Faso's hope for a more independent, self-determined future. Inside the palace, Traoré sat in his private study, surrounded by intelligence reports that for once failed to hold his attention. His thoughts kept returning to the woman and child now residing in the guest quarters under discreet security protection. The timing couldn't have been more challenging, with the Alliance of Sahel States Summit approaching and growing international pressure regarding his promised timeline for returning to democratic governance. A soft knock interrupted his brooding. Major Dio, his most trusted security advisor and closest confidant, entered with a thin file folder. "Captain, I have completed the initial background investigation you requested," Dio reported, placing the folder on the desk with the careful precision that characterized all his actions. Traoré opened the file, finding a photograph of a younger Fatimata in hospital scrubs, her expression serious but kind. The accompanying documents painted the picture of a woman whose life story seemed refreshingly free of the complications he might have expected. "Fatimata Ouedraogo, 29 years old," Dio began his summary. "Born in a small village near Kaya, trained as a nurse at the Regional Medical Institute, worked at the military hospital during the period of your deployment there. No criminal record, no known political affiliations or connections to opposition groups. Her timeline aligns perfectly with your service in the region." "Family background?" Traoré inquired, studying the photograph more closely. "Deceased father who worked as a rural school teacher. Mother still lives in the family village, engaged in subsistence agriculture. 2 brothers, one farming, one serving in our army at the Mali border. No suspicious connections or foreign ties that we can identify." Traoré closed the file, his analytical mind processing the information. "And the child?" "Born in a clinic in Kaya, officially registered as Ismael Ouedraogo. Birth certificate shows no father listed, which is consistent with her story about your unavailability at the time." The captain stood and walked to the window overlooking the palace courtyard. Beyond the security perimeter, he could see small groups of people who had gathered throughout the day, their presence a reminder that his personal life had become a matter of national interest. "Public reaction?" he asked. "Mixed but evolving," Dio replied. "Initial shock is giving way to more complex responses. Rural communities and traditional leaders are showing surprising support. They appreciate direct acknowledgement of responsibility. Urban intellectuals are more critical, questioning judgment and timing. The military appears largely supportive, seeing it as evidence of your human side. And our regional partners? Cautious but not hostile. Mali's leadership has sent informal signals of support. Niger remains neutral. International media is treating it as a scandal, but our immediate neighbors seem to understand the cultural context better." Traoré turned back to his advisor. "Arrange for DNA testing, discreet but thorough. I need absolute certainty before making any public statements." "Already in progress, Captain. Results should be available within 48 hours. As Dio departed, Traoré found himself facing the most personally challenging decision of his leadership. Everything he had worked toward, the transformation of Burkina Faso into a truly sovereign nation, free from neo-colonial influence, could potentially be undermined by this single personal revelation. Yet the alternative, denying what might be the truth, would undermine everything he claimed to stand for. The next morning brought chaos to the normally ordered routine of palace life. International news organizations had picked up the story, street vendors capitalized on crowds gathered near the palace gates, and social media exploded with opinions, memes, and wild speculation about the implications for Burkina Faso's young leader. Traoré maintained his usual schedule: dawn physical training, morning prayers, security briefings, but found his mind repeatedly returning to the woman and child now residing under his protection. The preliminary DNA results would arrive that afternoon, but he found himself increasingly certain of what they would confirm. His morning meeting with Fatimata took place in a private garden within the palace complex, a space designed for quiet reflection away from the pressures of official business. She appeared composed, despite the media storm swirling around them, having left Ismail with a trusted palace aide for the duration of their conversation. "You've certainly created quite a stir," Traoré observed as she joined him on a bench beneath a flowering tree. "That was never my intention," she replied, smoothing her traditional dress. "For months I tried to reach you through official channels, letters to your office, requests through proper military protocols. Everything was either ignored or blocked by your staff. And so you chose this very public approach?" "I chose the only approach that remained available to me. Would you have preferred I went directly to journalists with my story?" Her response carried a hint of the steel he remembered from Kaya, where she was known for her unwavering advocacy for her patients, regardless of their rank or status. "Why now?" he asked, leaning forward slightly. "It's been over 2 years since the coup that brought me to power. If Ismail is truly my son, why wait so long to make contact?" Fatimata was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "At first, I was afraid. The country was in upheaval, your position was uncertain, and I worried about what association with me might mean for your political survival. As time passed and your leadership solidified, I watched your speeches about building a new Burkina Faso based on integrity and self-reliance." She met his gaze directly. "I decided that my son deserved to know his father, especially one who speaks so eloquently about responsibility and truth. If those principles mean anything, they should apply to personal life as well as political rhetoric." Before Traoré could respond, his phone buzzed with the message he had been anticipating. The preliminary DNA results were available. delivered ahead of schedule due to the urgency of the situation. He read the brief text message, his expression carefully controlled despite the confirmation of what he had increasingly suspected. Setting the phone aside, he looked at Fatimata with new understanding. "The test confirms what you've claimed," he said quietly. "Ismail is my son." Relief and vindication flickered across her features, followed quickly by apprehension about what would come next. "I never doubted it," she said simply.
"This changes everything," Traoré acknowledged, the full weight of the situation settling upon him. "Or perhaps it changes nothing, except that a boy will finally know his father," Fatimata replied. "The question now is what kind of father you choose to be and what kind of leader you remain." Their conversation was interrupted by Major Dio's arrival, his expression conveying the urgency of developing situations beyond the palace walls. "Captain, forgive the intrusion, but there are developments requiring your immediate attention. Student demonstrations have begun at the university, with competing groups forming around this issue. We also have reports of similar gatherings in Bobo-Dioulasso and Kaya." Traoré stood, immediately shifting into his leadership mode. "Casualties or violence?" "None so far, but tensions are rising. Some groups support your apparent acknowledgement of responsibility, while others question your fitness for leadership based on personal judgment." "Deploy crowd control units for observation only," Traoré instructed. "No intervention unless absolutely necessary for public safety, and ensure officers known for restraint are selected. The last thing we need is heavy-handed responses to peaceful expression." As Dio departed to implement these orders, Traoré turned back to Fatimata. "You and Ismail will remain here, safe and comfortable, until I determine the best path forward." "And will I have any voice in determining that path?" she challenged. "Or has this become purely a matter of state policy?" Her question highlighted the fundamental tension they now faced, balancing personal relationships with public responsibilities, private rights with national interests. "The welfare of both you and Ismail is my priority," Traoré assured her, "but we must also consider the broader implications for the country's stability and future." By noon, the story had reached every corner of Burkina Faso. In marketplace discussions and taxi conversations, at roadside food stalls and government offices, people debated the implications with the passionate engagement usually reserved for football matches or election campaigns. In Kaya, where Fatimata had worked at the military hospital, the local community buzzed with pride and concern. Many remembered the quiet, dedicated nurse who had treated their children and sick relatives with unwavering care, and now she was connected to the most powerful man in their country. "She was always special," declared Mariam, who sold fruit near the hospital. "You could see she had strength beyond her years, and she was kind to everyone, whether they could pay or not." Others were more skeptical about the timing and motivations. "It seems convenient," argued a retired teacher at a local cafe. "Just as the captain is building international respect, suddenly this appears. Someone might be using this woman for political purposes." Back in Ouagadougou, Traoré convened an emergency cabinet meeting in the secure conference room. The space reflected his vision for the country: modern technology seamlessly integrated with traditional Burkinabe art and cultural symbols, representing progress rooted in heritage. "We need to control the narrative," insisted Communications Minister Zongrana, his wire-rimmed glasses reflecting the overhead lights. "The information vacuum is being filled with speculation and rumor. Social media is completely out of control." "What do you propose?" Traoré asked, his uniform immaculate despite the mounting pressure of the day. "A carefully crafted statement acknowledging the situation while emphasizing that your focus remains entirely on national security and development. We neither confirm nor deny specific details until all investigations are complete." Major Dio shook his head firmly. That approach will seem evasive and calculated. The captain's credibility is built on directness and authenticity. Political language will undermine everything he represents. Then what would you have me say? Traoré asked, turning to his security chief. The truth, whatever it may be, Dio answered without hesitation. Your supporters value honesty above all else. It's what distinguishes you from previous leaders who put political convenience above personal integrity. Minister Bance, the only woman among Traoré's senior advisors, raised a different concern. Has anyone considered the woman's perspective in all this? If the child is yours, Captain, she becomes the mother of a presidential heir, with all the complications that entails. If the child isn't yours, she'll be branded as a liar, an opportunist. Either way, her life is forever changed. Traoré nodded thoughtfully. Ensure her security is doubled, but discreetly. No one approaches her without my direct authorization. As the meeting continued, Fatimata sat in her assigned quarters with Ismail, trying to distract the increasingly restless toddler while processing the surreal situation she had created. The rooms were more luxurious than her modest apartment in Kaya, but they felt like a gilded cage, complete with armed guards and restricted movement. When Minister Bance arrived for an unannounced visit, Fatimata was initially wary. The minister, however, proved to be genuinely interested in understanding her perspective rather than managing her as a potential threat. I've come to see if you have everything you need, Bance explained, and perhaps to understand your story better than my male colleagues might. Over the next hour, as Ismail played with toys provided by palace staff, the two women talked openly. Bance asked about her work as a nurse, her family background, and her relationship with Traoré during his military posting.
He was different then, Fatimata explained, watching Ismail stack colorful blocks. Still passionate about change and justice, but more open to listening, more willing to share his thoughts and dreams. He talked about his village childhood, his mother's struggles, his vision for what Burkina Faso could become. And now? Bance prompted gently. Now he speaks of national security, geopolitical alliances, and historical imperatives. The man I knew seems hidden beneath the captain's uniform and the weight of presidential responsibilities. Before Bance could respond, her phone buzzed with an urgent message. Reading it, her expression became more guarded. The DNA results have confirmed paternity, she said quietly. The captain will need to make a public statement soon. The pressure is becoming impossible to manage through silence. That evening, as palace lights illuminated the national flag visible to crowds still gathered beyond the gates, Traoré made a decision that would define not only his personal future, but potentially the trajectory of his nation's development. Standing in his private office, he reviewed the carefully crafted speech prepared by his communications team. The diplomatic language felt hollow and calculating, words designed to minimize political damage rather than speak truth. With a decisive gesture, he pushed the document aside and pulled a blank sheet of paper toward him. If he was going to address this situation, he would do so in his own words, speaking as a soldier, as a leader, and as a father. The broadcast studio buzzed with tension as technicians prepared the national transmission systems. Traoré declined the makeup offered by staff, preferring to appear as he was, a soldier addressing his people directly about matters of profound personal and national significance. As the camera's red light activated, indicating live broadcast across the nation, he took a deep breath and began. People of Burkina Faso, I come before you tonight not only as your leader, but as a man who must address a personal truth that has become a matter of public interest and national conversation.
Throughout the country, people gathered around televisions and radios, their normal evening activities suspended as they listened to their young president's unprecedented personal revelation. 2 days ago, a woman named Fatimata Wedra Ogo arrived at the presidential palace with a child she claimed was mine. Medical testing has now confirmed this to be accurate. The boy, Ismael, is my son. The directness of his statement sent shockwaves through living rooms, bars, and community centers where people had gathered to hear his address. This was not the careful political language they had expected, but the stark honesty that had first drawn them to support him. Some will use this revelation to question my judgment, my character, or my fitness to lead our nation through these challenging times. These criticisms may have merit. I do not claim perfection or immunity from human failing. In her quarters, Fatimata watched the broadcast while holding Ismael, tears welling in her eyes as she heard the public acknowledgement she had sought for so long. But I stand before you today to affirm that while I acknowledge this personal responsibility, my commitment to Burkina Faso remains absolute and unwavering. The challenges we face together, securing our borders, building our economy, charting an independent course free from neo-colonial influence, these remain my focus and my purpose. Traoré paused, setting aside his notes entirely and speaking now from conviction rather than preparation. Our nation's heritage teaches us that leadership is not about perfection, but about integrity. It's about facing truth directly, accepting responsibility fully, and moving forward with purpose despite obstacles and complications. In villages and cities across the country, people found themselves nodding in agreement, recognizing in his words the qualities that had first inspired their support for his leadership. I will honor my obligations to this child as I honor my oath to this nation. One responsibility does not diminish the other. Rather, they reinforce the same fundamental principle that promises must be kept, that responsibility must be embraced, and that the future we build must be founded on truth rather than convenience. As he concluded his address, promising additional details would be forthcoming, a remarkable phenomenon began occurring across Burkina Faso. People emerged from their homes not in protest or condemnation, but in spontaneous displays of solidarity and support. In Ouagadougou's central square, hundreds of people linked arms and sang traditional songs celebrating family, responsibility, and community. In Bobo Dioulassou, religious leaders led prayers for the child, the mother, and the nation. The captain's human admission, his embrace of responsibility rather than denial or evasion, resonated deeply with people accustomed to leaders who placed themselves above accountability. As the broadcast ended and Traoré rose from his chair, Major Dio approached with preliminary reaction reports. "Sir, initial response appears overwhelmingly positive. The directness seems to have caught everyone, including opposition groups, by surprise. Internationally, reactions are mixed, but our regional allies are responding more favorably."
Traoré nodded, feeling a strange sense of liberation despite the complexities that lay ahead. The truth, once spoken, carried its own power. It could no longer be twisted, manipulated, or used against him from the shadows. "Arrange a private dinner," he instructed Dio. "Fatimata and Ismael should join me. Minimal staff, maximum privacy." That evening, as Traoré shared a meal with Fatimata and watched Ismael play with palace toys, he began to envision a path forward that honored both his personal responsibilities and his public duties. For the first time in months, conversation flowed naturally between them, moving beyond formal politeness to genuine dialogue about their shared future and their son's needs.
Dawn broke over Ouagadougou with the muezzin's call to prayer echoing across the city, but this morning carried the fresh energy of a nation that had witnessed something unprecedented, a leader who chose truth over convenience, personal responsibility over political calculation. Traoré completed his customary dawn exercise routine, the physical discipline serving as an anchor amid the transformed landscape of his personal and political life. The preliminary intelligence reports showed a remarkably positive public response to his television address, confounding advisors who had predicted political damage from such direct acknowledgement. His morning prayers in the palace mosque provided a moment of reflection before the day's challenges. As he completed the ritual that had become essential to his daily routine, he noticed Imam Ouedraogo waiting patiently nearby. The elderly religious leader had served as spiritual advisor to palace residents through multiple regimes, providing continuity and wisdom through political transitions. "You seem more peaceful this morning, my son," the imam observed as Traoré approached. "I feel the relief that comes from speaking truth rather than managing deception, though I know challenges remain ahead. The greatest leaders in Islamic history were those who acknowledged their humanity while fulfilling their responsibilities," the imam said thoughtfully. "Your honesty yesterday may strengthen rather than weaken your connection to the people." Their conversation was interrupted by Lieutenant Ouagadougou's arrival with the daily intelligence briefing. The reports painted a picture of a nation processing change but not in crisis. Demonstrations remained peaceful, international reactions were stabilizing, and domestic support appeared to be consolidating around appreciation for presidential honesty. "There is one security concern," Ouagadougou noted carefully. "Intelligence suggests potential threats against Madame Ouedraogo and the child, possibly connected to foreign interests uncomfortable with your growing regional influence." Traoré's expression hardened immediately. "Details?" "Preliminary intercepted communications suggest surveillance activities and possibly planned harassment or intimidation. We're increasing protective measures while investigating the source." The threat against Fatimata and Ismael added urgency to decisions Traoré had been contemplating about their long-term security and integration into his life. That morning, he visited their quarters to discuss practical arrangements for their future. He found Fatimata in the small garden area assigned to their accommodation, watching Ismael explore the flowers and butterflies with the fearless curiosity of a healthy toddler. The domestic scene struck him with unexpected poignancy. This was his family, however unconventional the circumstances of their formation. "The security team informs me you've been asking about returning to Kaya," Traoré said, joining her on a bench where she could supervise Ismael's exploration. "I can't remain in the palace indefinitely," she replied practically. "I have my profession, my responsibilities, my own life to consider." "Your return to Kaya is not possible at present. Intelligence indicates specific threats against you and Ismael, likely connected to those who see our relationship as a vulnerability they can exploit." Fatimata's expression showed frustration mixed with understanding. "So we become prisoners of your position?" He corrected gently, "You become protected by my resources. There may be a solution that allows you professional engagement while maintaining necessary security." He outlined a proposal he had developed with his security team. Fatimata could work at the military hospital in Ouagadougou, which already maintained high security protocols for treating government officials and military personnel. Housing could be arranged in a protected residential compound nearby, allowing her to practice nursing while keeping Ismael in a secure childcare facility within the hospital complex. "Could I continue my work as a nurse?" she asked, hope evident in her voice. "Yes, with certain security limitations, but yes. And Ismael would be nearby while you work, in a facility already secured for military families." As they discussed practical details, Ismael toddled over with a flower he had picked, offering it first to his mother, and then, after some encouragement, to Traoré. The simple gesture of childish generosity touched something deep within the captain, a recognition of the fundamental humanity that politics and power could sometimes obscure. "What about your role in his life?" she asked directly. "Will you be a distant figure who provides security and resources, or will you be present as a father?" The question cut to the heart of challenges Traoré had been avoiding. His position demanded constant attention, travel, and decision-making that left little time for personal relationships. Yet he found himself unwilling to replicate his own childhood experience of an absent father whose work kept him away from family.
"I will be present," he said with quiet conviction. "Not conventional, perhaps, but consistent. He will know me not just as a provider, but as his father." Over the following weeks, the practical arrangements were implemented with characteristic military efficiency. Fatimata began work at the military hospital's pediatric unit, finding professional fulfillment in treating children of service members, while maintaining the security protocols necessary for her protection. Traoré established a routine of visiting each morning before his official duties began and returning in the evening when possible. These visits, initially formal and awkward, gradually developed into natural father-son interactions as Ismail grew more comfortable with this tall man in uniform who brought toys and spoke to him with gentle authority. The arrangement worked better than anyone had initially expected. Fatimata found her medical skills particularly valuable in treating young patients affected by the ongoing conflict in northern regions, while Ismail thrived in the structured but caring environment of the military childcare facility. 3 months after Fatimata's initial arrival at the palace, the delicate balance they had achieved was disrupted by escalating security concerns. Major Dio reported that intelligence had confirmed foreign elements were actively planning operations targeting both mother and child as means of pressuring Traoré's government. "The threats have moved beyond surveillance to operational planning," Dio explained during a secure briefing. "We've intercepted communications suggesting coordinated activities designed to use your family as leverage against your domestic and international policies." Traoré's jaw tightened as he reviewed the intelligence summaries. Source assessment? Multiple actors with varying motivations, some connected to Western interests uncomfortable with your anti-colonial stance, others possibly linked to regional opponents of the Alliance of Sahel states. The diversity of potential threats makes protection more complex. The captain made an immediate decision that would fundamentally alter the living arrangements he had carefully constructed. Prepare to relocate them to the palace complex permanently. Better to consolidate security in an environment we fully control than try to protect multiple vulnerable locations. Sir, bringing them into the palace creates different types of vulnerabilities. Their presence here becomes impossible to conceal, and it changes the symbolic dynamics of your leadership. "I'm aware of the implications," Traoré replied firmly, "but scattered security has proven inadequate. My first responsibility is ensuring their physical safety." The relocation occurred discreetly at dawn, with Fatimata and Ismail moved to a private wing of the palace complex that could provide both comfort and maximum security. Though reluctant to surrender the independence she had begun to rebuild, Fatimata recognized that Ismail's safety took precedence over her personal preferences. A medical office was established within the palace, allowing her to continue nursing duties by treating palace staff families and providing healthcare services to the broader presidential household. While not the community medicine she preferred, it maintained her professional engagement and utilized her skills meaningfully. The palace staff, initially uncertain about how to interact with the president's unofficial family, gradually accepted their presence with the adaptability characteristic of those who serve in politically dynamic environments.
Fatimata's professional medical skills quickly made her indispensable, while Ismail's cheerful presence brought an unexpected warmth to the formal atmosphere of government life. "Are these arrangements satisfactory?" Traoré asked during one of his evening visits to their quarters, a spacious apartment that had been converted from former guest accommodations. "The living situation is more than adequate," Fatimata replied diplomatically. "But confinement remains confinement, however comfortable the surroundings." "I understand your frustration," he acknowledged, "but until the security threats are neutralized, this provides the best protection for Ismail." Their conversation was interrupted by Ismail himself, who had learned to walk and now approached his father with the confident stride of a child secure in his welcome. At 18 months old, he had begun to develop distinct preferences and personality traits that both parents found endlessly fascinating. "Baba," Ismail announced proudly, having recently mastered this crucial word. He reached up to be lifted, a request Traoré fulfilled with growing ease and pleasure. "He's been practicing that word all day," Fatimata smiled. "He points to your photograph and says Baba whenever he sees it." The simple domestic moment provided a brief respite from the complex political and security considerations that dominated most of Traoré's waking hours. Holding his son, he felt the weight of dual responsibilities that no longer seemed contradictory but complementary. Leading a nation and raising a child both required vision, patience, and unwavering commitment. As weeks turned to months, Traoré found himself receiving an unexpected education in fatherhood that no military academy or leadership training had prepared him for. Ismail's rapid development provided daily surprises and challenges that required different skills than those needed for governing a nation. "He has your determination," Fatimata observed one evening as they watched Ismail repeatedly attempt to stack blocks that kept tumbling down, his face showing intense concentration with each attempt. "And your stubbornness," Traoré replied with a hint of humor, recognizing traits from both parents in their son's persistent efforts. These quiet family moments became increasingly precious to Traoré, providing balance to the intense demands of leadership during a particularly challenging period for Burkina Faso. The northern regions remained unstable due to jihadist activity. Economic pressures continued to strain government resources, and international critics maintained pressure regarding democratic transition timelines. Yet, in the palace's private quarters, he could simply be a father, teaching his son to walk, reading traditional stories, or sharing meals with the woman who had fundamentally altered his understanding of personal responsibility. The legal formalities were completed during this period as well. Official documents now listed the child as Ismail Ouedraogo Traoré, acknowledging both maternal and paternal lineages according to Burkina Faso's traditional naming customs. The paperwork represented more than bureaucratic necessity. It was formal recognition of familial bonds that transcended political convenience. "Whatever challenges arise in the future," Traoré told Fatimata as they reviewed the completed documents, "Ismail will always know his complete heritage and identity." Palace life developed its own rhythms around the small family's presence. Staff members who initially maintained formal distance gradually warmed to Ismail's innocent charm, while Fatimata's medical skills became increasingly valuable as she treated everything from diplomatic illnesses to household accidents with professional competence. The security concerns that had prompted their relocation to the palace proved well-founded when Major Dio's team intercepted and neutralized a planned kidnapping attempt. The operation, traced to foreign intelligence services working through local proxies, confirmed that Traoré's family had indeed become targets for those seeking to destabilize his leadership. The threat has been eliminated, Dio reported after the successful counterintelligence operation, but it demonstrates the ongoing vulnerability that family connections create in your position. Rather than viewing his family as a liability, however, Traoré found that fatherhood had sharpened his focus on building a better future for Burkina Faso. Every policy decision now carried additional weight as he considered what kind of nation he wanted Ismail to inherit. When Imam Sankara suggested organizing a traditional naming ceremony for Ismail, Traoré initially hesitated due to security concerns. However, Fatimata's quiet insistence that their son deserved proper recognition within their cultural traditions ultimately convinced him to proceed with appropriate modifications. Ismail should understand his place in both our family histories, she argued. Traditional ceremonies provide roots that children need, especially when their circumstances are unusual. The naming ceremony took place in the palace's central courtyard, transformed for the occasion into a space that honored both security requirements and cultural authenticity. Traoré appeared not in his customary military uniform, but in traditional Mosi clothing that reflected his village origins and cultural heritage. Fatimata's mother and brothers traveled from their rural home under discreet security protection, while Traoré's maternal uncle represented his family lineage. The gathering remained small due to security necessities, but it captured the essential elements of traditional Burkinabe celebrations. The most meaningful moment came when soil from both family compounds was ceremonially combined in a clay pot where a small tree was planted, representing Ismail's roots in both lineages and his connection to the land that would shape his identity. "My daughter has always shown strong judgment in her choices," Fatimata's mother told Traoré privately during the celebration. "That she chose you, despite all the complications, tells me much about the man behind the uniform and the position." The ceremony provided more than cultural recognition. It offered Traoré insights into traditional approaches to leadership and family responsibility that complemented his modern political education. Elder family members shared stories of ancestors who had balanced community leadership with personal obligations, providing historical context for his current challenges. 3 days after the naming ceremony, Major Dio reported another security development that demonstrated the ongoing challenges of protecting a presidential family. "We've intercepted communications suggesting a new threat, this time specifically targeting Madame Ouedraogo and the child during any public appearances. The intelligence suggests both foreign and domestic elements coordinating to create maximum disruption." Traoré authorized immediate enhanced security measures, including the deployment of counterintelligence teams to identify and neutralize the threat networks. The operation succeeded in dismantling the planned attacks, but it reinforced the reality that his personal life would always create vulnerabilities that enemies could attempt to exploit. "Will it always be this way?" Fatimata asked after being briefed on the security threats. "Living behind cordons of protection, with Ismail growing up surrounded by bodyguards and risk assessments?" Traoré replied carefully, "Political situations evolve. As stability increases and threats diminish, normal life becomes more possible. But complete normalcy may never be achievable given my position and Burkina Faso's security environment." They discussed arrangements that might provide Ismail with more conventional childhood experiences while maintaining necessary protection, carefully supervised visits to public places, interaction with other children from military families, educational opportunities that balanced security with socialization. The conversation led to deeper discussions about their relationship and future together. Neither had initially envisioned the arrangement they now found themselves in. a unique partnership built on shared responsibility for their child rather than conventional romantic attachment, yet characterized by mutual respect and growing emotional connection.
I never regretted bringing Ishmael to the palace gates that day, Fatimata said during one of their evening conversations. He deserves to know his father, and you deserve to know your son, whatever complications that creates. 10 months had passed since Fatimata's dramatic appearance at the presidential palace. What had begun as a potential scandal had evolved into accepted reality, with the president's son and his mother having established their place within the complex ecosystem of Burkina Faso's political life. Traoré's morning ritual with Ishmael had become perhaps the most cherished hour of his day. The boy, now approaching his second birthday, would greet his father with enthusiastic shouts of "Baba! Baba!" that could be heard throughout their wing of the palace. "He's been waiting for you since he woke up," Fatimata would smile, watching their son's excitement at his father's arrival. These daily interactions had evolved from awkward formality to natural father-son bonding. Traoré found himself looking forward to Ishmael's questions, his excitement over simple discoveries, and his unconscious demonstrations of trust and affection. Fatimata's role had also expanded beyond her initial medical duties. The community health center that Traoré had established, partly to provide her with meaningful professional engagement, had become a model for healthcare delivery in Ouagadougou, combining modern medical practices with traditional community health approaches. The ceremony for the health center's expansion is scheduled for next week, she mentioned during one of their planning discussions. The staff has requested that I speak about pediatric care and community health integration. You should accept, Traoré encouraged. Your perspective as both a healthcare provider and a mother brings unique credibility to discussions about children's needs. Their relationship had settled into a comfortable partnership that defied conventional categories. Neither quite marriage nor simple co-parenting. It represented a pragmatic approach to shared responsibility that honored both their individual autonomy and their commitment to Ishmael's well-being. For Ishmael's second birthday celebration, they organized a small gathering that balanced security requirements with the child's need for normal social interaction. The guest list included Fatimata's family, Traoré's uncle, and several palace staff members who had become genuinely fond of the energetic toddler. "You have found your way through very difficult terrain," Imam Ouedraogo observed to Traoré during the celebration. "See how naturally he moves between you and his mother, completely secure in belonging to both worlds you represent." The observation captured something essential about their success in creating stability for Ismail, despite the unusual circumstances of his family situation. The child showed no signs of confusion or insecurity about his identity. He was simply a boy who had a father, a mother, and an extended family that included palace staff who had become surrogate aunts and uncles. Later that evening, as Traoré and Fatimata cleaned up after the party while Ishmael napped contentedly, they reflected on how far they had all traveled from that morning when she first appeared at the palace gates. "Thank you," Traoré said quietly, "for bringing him to the palace that day, for your persistence when I was resistant, and for your partnership in this unexpected journey." "We have all learned and grown," Fatimata replied, watching their son sleep peacefully, "and Ishmael has benefited from that growth." As they knelt together admiring Ismail's new birthday toys, the moment captured the essence of their unique family unit, unconventional in structure but genuine in commitment, complex in circumstance but simple in their shared love for the child who had brought them together.
That evening, standing at his office window overlooking the palace courtyard, where security lights illuminated the Burkinabé flag, Traoré reflected on the extraordinary year that had transformed not only his personal life, but his understanding of leadership itself. The dual responsibilities he now carried, to millions of citizens and to one small boy, no longer seemed contradictory but complementary. Each role informed and strengthened the other, creating a more complete foundation for the decisions that shaped Burkina Faso's future. International observers had initially predicted that the personal revelations would weaken Traoré's political position, but the opposite had occurred. His honest acknowledgement of responsibility, his integration of family obligations with public duties, and his refusal to hide behind political calculation had actually strengthened public confidence in his leadership. The alliance of Sahel states had developed into a more robust partnership, partly because other leaders respected Traoré's demonstrated integrity in personal matters as evidence of reliability in political commitments. Even Western critics had been forced to acknowledge that his handling of the situation showed maturity and character that contradicted their dismissive assessments of young African leaders. More importantly for Traoré himself, fatherhood had provided new perspective on the long-term implications of his policy decisions. Every choice about education, healthcare, economic development, and security now carried the weight of considering what kind of nation Ismail and his generation would inherit. The morning routine with his son had become a daily reminder that leadership ultimately serves the future, not just the present. In Ismail's innocent questions about the world around him, Traoré found both inspiration for his vision of Burkina Faso's potential and motivation for the difficult work of making that vision a reality. As he prepared for another day of governing a nation facing complex challenges, Captain Ibrahim Traoré carried with him the understanding that true leadership embraces both public duty and personal responsibility, that strength comes from truth rather than convenience, and that the most important legacy any leader can leave is a better world for the children who will inherit it. The story of the captain's child had become, ultimately, a story about the kind of leader and the kind of father that Burkina Faso needed, one who understood that personal integrity and public service were not separate obligations but different expressions of the same fundamental commitment to truth, responsibility, and hope for the future. In the growing light of dawn over Ouagadougou, as the call to prayer echoed across the city and another day of leadership began, Ibrahim Traoré moved forward, carrying both the weight and the joy of his dual roles, ready to continue building the better tomorrow that both his nation and his son deserved.